Good Yontif again. You may know that our architect, Minoru Yamasaki, modeled this breathtaking room after the ancient tent of meeting from the Torah. People walk in here all the time to appreciate the design or gaze at the magnificent, so we might once in a while forget that this sanctuary was not built to be studied or toured. It was meant to be experienced. When our community gathers for these high holy days, we do our best to focus on the traditional prayers, the beautiful music, the reflective meditations. But Yamasaki understood that sitting here, we would be transported to another time, thousands of years ago, when our ancestors wandered through the desert, carried the belongings on their backs, when their prayers for rain or fertility might literally mean the difference between life and death, and when your very existence was defined by your tribe. This sanctuary evokes our tribal instincts only to bring us right back here so that we might notice that powerful thread that connects that tent of meeting with our own. We may get a sense of majesty by looking up. We may get a sense of the spiritual by looking down at our books, but we can only get a sense of holiness by looking around. It is called a tent of meeting because this is the place where our sacred community gathers together and draws inspiration from one another. The heart of this temple is not the books, not the building, it's our people. Judaism has been incredibly successful for an incredibly long time. In fact, you might call us an historical anomaly. Mark Twain famously commented on this in 1899 when he marveled at our ability to contribute to the world's list of great names in literature, science, art, music, finance, medicine, and abstruse learning, way out of proportion to the weakness of our numbers. Recognizing that everyone from Egyptians and Persians to Greeks and Romans held their torch high and then faded away, he wondered, all things are mortal but the Jew. All other forces pass, but he remains. What is the secret of his immortality? I sort of wish I could speak to Twain myself, because I may have an answer. Community. From its earliest days, Judaism has endeavored to create strong communities. Not individuals, not families. They are the vital building blocks of a healthy community. But each of us will rise or fall based on the strength of our community, not the other way around. And as Twain noticed, that notion has served us well for a long time. This sanctuary is a not so subtle reminder that we are best when we cling to that tribal mentality, when we support one another, guide one another. Our Judaism unites us even in the face of great difficulty. There's no question that we have suffered, our people has suffered through tremendous oppression, and we have survived at least in part due to our unwavering support of one another and our willingness to sacrifice on behalf of the community rather than simply meeting our own personal needs. As a result of this community-centered approach, Judaism was often the primary factor in determining where we lived, where we worked, how we ate, who was in your Maj group, whom you married. We may not exist in the same historical circumstances that we have. We might not feel the same need to protect ourselves by closing ranks. But still, we are reminded that we share common heritage with our ancestors, just as we share common destiny with those who surround us today. Ours is a large and vibrant temple, and there would be no way for us to know all of our fellow congregants. But it is the relationships between us that define our community and will ultimately determine our future. So perhaps we should get to know each other a little bit better. What do we care about? How do we spend our time? What makes us who we are? Who are these people in our tribe? So I'd like to ask you, please raise your hand if you are a teacher. Raise your hand if you are a lawyer. How about if you work online? Raise your hand if you work in one of the most important places of all, at home. Okay, raise your hand if you are a firstborn child. Middle child? How about if you're the baby of the family? Raise your hand if you cry during a good movie. How about if you think Game of Thrones is the greatest show in the history of television? I was going to say West Wing, but Game of Thrones. Raise your hand if you've ever broken a bone. Raise your hand if you have been south of the equator. Raise your hand if you get nervous speaking in front of people. Raise your hand if you can name all 4 Beatles. Not going to make a generational comment there. Raise your hand if you have become a temple member within the last 5 years. Raise your hand if you're a second-generation temple member. Raise your hand if your family has been at this temple for 3 or more generations. Raise your hand if you recognize the person sitting 3 seats to your right. Raise your hand if you can name the person sitting 2 rows directly in front of you. Pretty good, pretty good. We could obviously go on and on with all this, but let me allow myself to ask one final question. Raise your hand if you're interested in telling your neighbors this morning if you are a Republican or a Democrat. I count 6. 6. I don't mean to raise anyone's pulse, obviously. Every one of us is unique, and yet we share a lot in common. So why should that last question induce a different reaction than all the rest? Let's put that on hold for just a moment. We live at a fascinating time in history. Our American Jewish community is probably as safe and successful as we have ever been in our history. In fact, we are doing so well that we are loosening our grip on that tribal structure that sustained us for so long. We are no longer forced to choose professions or social opportunities based only on being Jewish. So we're expanding our horizons, getting more involved in secular causes, spending less time doing recognizably Jewish activities. We are achieving what many Jewish generations could only dream of, fitting in. And yet, identity matters. We make decisions in life based on how we see ourselves and how we assess the people around us. Let's take relationships, personal relationships as an example. We enjoy these stories about how opposites attract, and some of us might be able to relate. But the truth is that almost never happens. We just convince ourselves by focusing on a particular characteristic. For example, my dear Rachel Ann can tell you not only when we received every single object in our home, but who gave it to us and for what occasion. Personally, I consider it a victory if I don't give someone the same gift twice. Proof, opposites attract. Except that one particular skill represents the tiniest fraction of who we are. Relationships tend to work because we find people who are similar to us, those with whom we share a similar background, education, worldview, fundamental values. So as our community spends more time fitting in with those who are like us in other ways, if we no longer identify first and foremost as Jews, how do we identify ourselves? In the year 1960, polls showed that less than 5% of Americans would be upset if their children married someone from the other political party. By 2010, the number had shot up to 25%, and today, less than a decade later, it's inching toward 50%. Taking it further, a pair of scientists analyzed a massive amount of data about marriage in the United States just last year. Out of more than 18 million couples that they analyzed, 6% were Republican men marrying a Democratic woman, and 3% were Republican women marrying a Democratic man. Assuming that we are similar to most Americans, when it comes to deciding what is most important about ourselves and others, political party is becoming the primary gauge. Even if this doesn't describe you personally, I have a feeling that we can see it happening around us. But remember, for all this talk about partisanship, that's not really the topic at hand. This isn't a question of politics at all this morning. It's a question of unity versus discord, about the relationships in this sanctuary, about the nature of our tribe. It is about how we maintain the sacred connections that have nurtured us for so long in a world that feels increasingly divisive. Popular issues have always inflamed passions in America. So why do things seem to feel so different today? Shanto Iyengar, the director of Stanford's Political Communications Lab, has been studying this phenomenon for more than a decade. His research shows that this polarization is not actually about disagreement. We are witnessing, he says, the transformation of political affiliation into a form of personal identity. In the past few years, another group of scholars has been inquiring into the root causes of our nation's intense political divide. They argue that partisans on both sides believe different facts, use different economic theories, and hold differing views of history. But more to the point, they conclude that liberals and conservatives in the same country think as if they were from different cultures. Different cultures. What does that mean for all of us? We're sitting in this sanctuary specifically because we share culture, the way we make decisions, what is important to us, how we relate to others. Those similarities are the source of our ability not only to succeed, but to do good in the world. So if many of us are looking at our fellow temple members as if they are effectively from a different culture, you can see the problem. When I asked you if you would tell your neighbor if you are a Republican or a Democrat, my goal was not to enter politics at all. It was a way of teasing out the fault lines that are showing up in our community and what that means for our sense of solidarity. It wouldn't have mattered if I asked about politics or restaurants or whether Michigan or Michigan State is better. Any opinions there? That's the real third rail. The real question, the effective question this morning is, are there external limits to our ability to share our lives and the various facets of them as one unified temple family? It's no secret that across the country, Jewish religious practices are declining. Less people are lighting Shabbat candles or coming to services. Fewer kids are getting confirmed. Just look at the pictures on the wall of any temple. And yet, I believe that our community is deeply committed to our Jewish identity. We care about it. We take great pride in it. If people were not still looking for meaningful Jewish experiences, we wouldn't witness such a steady increase in participation right here at Temple. But as a rabbi, I become concerned when we raise the next logical question. What happens when religious observance continues to erode and the cultural bonds of community that have kept us active start to wither? All those generations when our ancestors clung to one another, to their tribe, will it be for naught? I remember visiting the Golan Heights when I was 13. They took us to a hillside where we could look across to another hillside that was in Syria. The border ran right down the middle where a Druze village had been separated by the border. At the time, there was no border crossing, there was no telephone service in the area, which meant the only way families who had been split apart could communicate was literally to shout across the valley to each other. And so it became known as the Valley of Shouting. You can still visit it today. There is no valley here in our sanctuary. Nobody has put a fortified border between us. But we are definitely shouting at each other. and often not out of love or affection or a yearning to pull together. Don't get me wrong. It feels really good to walk into temple these days. There's so much going on, so much excitement, so many kids running around. I don't want to diminish any of that. It's a joyful place that's filling up more and more every day. But there is an undercurrent that isn't as obvious, and it is wreaking havoc on us. The studies I just mentioned don't only apply to our neighbors. Politics has become personal and painful, and it is affecting how we behave as a community. Some of us may be familiar with a term to identify fellow Jews, M-O-T, member of the tribe. Today, though, sitting in our symbolic tent of meeting, what exactly is our tribe? We are having a harder and harder time talking to one another about real issues, the things that affect all of us. We are suspicious. We grow angry. We write or say or post things that veer into being abusive. In more than 24 years of working at large, successful temples, including our own, I have never witnessed such hostility among members of a temple family or within a Jewish community. I was at a baby naming a few weeks ago when a temple member explained to me how his wife had been distraught and anxious about the constant news alert she would receive. And worse, aside from feeling overwhelmed, she was actually fearful about saying the wrong thing to the wrong person because of the reaction she might get. I had a breakfast meeting recently at the gallery, bumped into another temple member who wanted to talk to me about how she just can't handle it anymore. Given everything happening in the world, given her friends' sometimes disturbing reactions to it, she simply wants to disengage. She wants to stop talking to people. Otherwise, she feels worse every day. Another member sat in my office just days ago and said, "I can't understand why people are so angry. Why are we treating each other this way? Isn't it a Jewish value to treat people with respect?" And another called me on the phone to ask me appropriately if I would come to her defense because she felt that people were not attacking her ideas, but attacking her personally. And she was right. This is not how members of a tribe operate. The Talmud teaches us one who shames another person in public, it is as if that person shed blood. It is as if we are killing another person's soul. Clearly, our tradition uses strong language to tell us that that sort of behavior is supposed to be off limits, but we seem to have lost sight of some of these fundamental values that we have shared for so long. If we are devolving into tribes based on our politics, what does that mean for the shared identity as Jews that supposedly brings all of us to temple on this holy day? We are human beings, every one of us, with all sorts of facets and stories and beliefs. Raising your hands wasn't just an exercise. It was a way to understand what makes up this tribe, who we are. I am a Jewish man, a husband, a father. I like to read adventure books. I like to let puppies lick my face once in a while. I love the mountains. I love to laugh with my wife. I love to play basketball with our boys. Like everyone in this sanctuary, I embody the brilliant words of the American poet Walt Whitman, "I am vast. I contain multitudes." How did we descend to a place where a person's personal political party becomes not only the first thing people seem to care about, but in some cases the only thing? What about all those qualities we just raised our hands for? What about all the rest that we didn't have time for? Rosh Hashanah, of course, is not about wringing our hands. It's a time for charting the course for our community over the next year and determining the specific Jewish values that will inform and support our choices. And at the risk of repeating myself, without a unified Jewish community, without a caring temple family, our future would be bleak. We cannot control what happens out there, and it's not solely our responsibility, but we can decide what happens in here. So let me suggest that our guiding inspiration come from a powerful midrash written long, long ago. The rabbis ask, Why did God begin the world by creating only one human being? The answer, I think, is filled with wisdom. The Midrash tells us that was done so that no person may say to another, "My Father is greater than yours." You can picture this happening on the playground. So simple, so elegant, so crucial. One of the ways we create durable community is by recognizing that no person is inherently better than another. We may be different. We certainly have divergent opinions, but none is superior. And that insight dictates how we are supposed to treat one another, view one another, work and play and rejoice together. And it is most decidedly not about putting the person next to us into a category and automatically deciding we are on the other team. If each of us can promise to remember that we are fundamentally equal, I'd like to humbly suggest 3 courses of action at the dawn of another new year. 3 things that we can do practically to change the way things have been. My primary plea today is that we will place a higher value on all that we share in common than we do on whatever it is that divides us. I'm certainly not asking everyone to agree on political issues. You all know what happens when more than 2 Jews get into a room. Many opinions, and that's fine. But the good of the community must be more important than whatever those issues are. When you feel that emotion rising, when you are absolutely sure that this other person is crazy or heartless or worse, recall that they, just like you, were created in the image of God. They share a spark of God with each of us. We have overcome brutal challenges before, and our sense of community has always triumphed over concerns about physical safety or financial security. Today, it happens to be political divisiveness threatening to tear us apart. Let's not let it. Am I saying that the substance of those issues doesn't matter? Of course not. The nature of political debate will never end. But when we enter these sacred halls, I submit that we would be breaking with 4,000 years of Jewish wisdom, Jewish tradition, Jewish values, if those politics become more important than the people of your tribe. Second, when we think our politics are too much to ignore, remember that we actually do have bigger issues that should concern all of us equally. For anyone who may not have noticed, there have been Nazis marching in the streets of American cities. Nazis. I'm fairly certain that is more important than whatever issue is being debated on Capitol Hill or in Lansing. We have all been startled by the recent wave of anti-Semitic incidents, from bomb threats to cemetery desecrations to swastikas at local schools, even a few days ago in Royal Oak. All the way to the madness of Charlottesville, with the bizarre and frightening chant, "Jews will not replace us." I have to be honest, I have no idea what that means. There are 15, maybe 16 million Jews in this country. We are a solid but slowly shrinking 2.5%, and somehow I just don't envision us replacing those concerned citizens with a wave of Jewish migration to Montana. But the sentiment they shared is clear, and it's frightening. At the same time, I think we would do well not to make more of it than it actually is. I was heartened to learn a few months ago, as part of my role on the ADL regional board, that while anti-Semitic incidents have risen dramatically, and FBI numbers show that anti-Semitism remains the overwhelming majority of hate crimes in America, not hate of any other group, that anti-Semitic sentiments have not increased. In other words, our neighbors are not growing more anti-Semitic in their attitudes, and America is not turning on the Jews. But those who already hold those views have clearly been emboldened. That truth is borne out in poll after poll, year after year. They do this constantly. It shows that Jews remain the most cherished religious group in America, more than any other group. This is not 1930s Germany. This is not 1880s Lithuania. It's not 1490s Spain. Really, it's not. But that doesn't mean we should leave it alone. If history has taught us anything, it is that even nascent anti-Semitism can turn into a grave problem when ignored. Let us commit to saying out loud, as often, whenever, wherever we need to, that anti-Semitism has no place in America or anywhere around the globe. And let us encourage our political leaders to do the same. We all know there are no sides here. There is simply resolve in the face of evil. Beyond that, we should commit ourselves to reinforcing the one thing that infuriates anti-Semites the most: a strong and united community, building holy relationships, and living a positive Jewish life. They cannot deal with that. My colleague and teacher, Rabbi David Stern, who is currently president of the Central Conference of American Rabbis, pointed out that after one of these bomb threats months ago at a Jewish school, the students on their way outside stopped to grab one of the Torahs. They brought it outside, spread a few jackets out, put the Torah down on a cart hood, and started learning and celebrating Jewish wisdom during the bomb threat. That, says Rabbi Stern, is how Judaism survives in the face of hostility. Which leads to my third recommendation. Each one of us can take concrete, specific steps that will rekindle your Jewish soul. Rabbi Brudney spoke beautifully last night about the objects that we hold on to, the memories that we have, and how we can put them to use in our life. Not just there, but put them into use. But the truth is, we can own our Judaism in so many different ways. There's lots we can do. You can count, of course, on Temple to provide lots of opportunities. Come have sushi in the sukkah on October 4th. Shake the lulav. Have a few drinks with friends. Take a class. Watch for our Adult Purim festival in March, or come on a Friday night for Shabbat to spend just an hour enjoying music, the spirit, and surrounded by a community filled with joy and serenity before heading out to dinner every Friday night. But it could be other things. Give money to Federation. Read a Jewish book. Go to Israel. Say the Shema with your children before they go to sleep at night. Explore a local synagogue whenever you travel someplace new. Serve on a board. Volunteer for a Jewish organization. On and on. Your Jewish soul can be ignited in so many ways if we'll commit to taking that step, which will both unite us, frustrate those who don't want this, and change the nature of our sacred community. Yes, your Jewish soul can be ignited in so many ways. We are a diverse congregation. Each of us has a story and a perspective that matters. And through the individual choices that we make, I pray that this Rosh Hashanah will be the time that we step back a little bit from the brink. Refuse to let another's political choices obscure your view of their soul. Remember that we have always, for thousands of years, been stronger together, and pledge to recapture our sense of unity, our sense of tribe. When we do, if we do, this sanctuary will become more than a tent of meeting. It will grow miraculously into a tent of meaning, a tent of connection, a tent of resilience, a tent of peace. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may all of this be God's will. Amen.